Greetings, everyone. Today we're going to be looking at the type of positions we'll get from one side having a queen and the other side having two rooks. And we're going to try and evaluate exactly which side is better and why. This is a little bit more complicated than I think most people realize, but we're going to break it down in a kind of simple manner. Now, we also don't want to go too simple here because I've seen many people simplify this in a bit of an unfair way. So what do I mean by unfair? So what I mean is in other videos I've seen when I research this topic, oftentimes I see people literally trading one queen for two rooks. Well, in that case, the two rooks are generally better because, each rook is worth 5 points and the queen is worth 9. So 5 plus 5 is, of course, 10. And generally speaking, the two rooks are going to be better as long as they're connected, as long as they're protecting each other or coordinated. Oftentimes, the two rooks will be better. However, that's not really quite fair because, of course, for that equal, to be an equal material, you would need like a queen and a pawn. So here I added black an extra pawn. That way it's more like a 5 versus 5, type of thing where the queen has 10, because the 9 and 1, the two rooks, equal it out. So it's not just the material we're looking at. We're actually looking at the imbalance, the queen versus, the two rooks, and both sides are equal material. So a lot of people will assume that if you have the rooks coordinated, like you do here, then that side will be better. Not always is that true. That's a key that if you have the two rooks, you should try and get them coordinated. But that's not to say you're necessarily better. Now, I'm going to go through 3 different examples here, positions that I just set up, and I have the computer try and play through them. And I just literally go with the absolute best computer move from the short analysis. We don't need exact specifics here. It's more important that you play the common ideas, or at least kind of the thought process and how to evaluate. So like I said, if you're the side with the two rooks, you generally want them protected. That way, the queen, as strong as it is, it's one piece. And the queen doesn't really want to sacrifice itself for a rook. Maybe two under certain circumstances, but generally speaking, you don't want to give up the queen for a rook. So if, the rooks were separated, say like, for example, this rook was over here on A2, then it's a lot more susceptible to forks because maybe you can play a move like this. You can fork the rook and with the king check and pick up one of the rooks. So that's one reason you want the rooks connected. But here, there's also one major problem, which is very similar to what I mentioned with the check. And this problem is white's king. Quite frankly, white's king is really not too safe here. And so in this position, black is actually slightly better because their king is exposed. The queen is very good not only at forks, but is also really good at playing a bunch of checks, maybe perpetual, and it's just really annoying for a king. So if this king was, much better defended, as we'll see in an example later, this would be a lot closer. Maybe the side with two rooks would be better. But as it stands, the one who's playing for a win is black. So let's flip the board. Let's play it from the black side. We'll have white play something, and then we'll see, what this looks like. So I just want to point out, go through here after this move, white really doesn't want to play another check, on E7. Just show here, like in this case, you could easily just trade. And then if you take, they trade back. The two rooks, for the queen, you've simplified, but, these pawns on the queen side are just way too strong. So I just want to point out, you can't really be sacrificing here. We're actually going to get some kind of long endgame. And I don't want to go into the details too much, just kind of breeze through the moves. And again, we're looking more of the common ideas, So here they're looking at the pawn. We're going to defend by pushing the pawn. And we'll just see how, the computer's the best play. Again, aim at this pawn, so they had to advance it. Again, the computer with best play, we're just seeing how they do this. Here in this case, we're defending the pawn here. Also looking at this rook. And, we're just going to try and get the pawns rolling. And then the key here, as we've noticed with king safety before, black's king is really safe. Because what black's king is going to do, in this case the side with the queen, is they're going to try and be sheltered by their wall of pawns. And as these pawns will move up the board, ideally the king will probably move with them. So their shelter is always kind of, protecting them as they advance and make progress. White's king, on the other hand, is just too weak, especially on the light squares here, as, we're cutting through the position. The queen is very good at these checks. So, practically speaking, black is a lot better here. We're already almost negative, 0.8, so already black is better. So they keep pushing, both sides advancing their pawns, give a check. Again, the king is using their shelter very nicely. And we just slowly make more and more progress. This is a nice move here because, you know, they're just aiming at this pawn, but they're also helping support this in the future, you know, so they're just very simple plans. They're just keep pushing. And again, we'll see with best play that the queen is actually going to be better because white's king was more exposed. So it's not just having rooks coordinated. So these pawns will push. And now this pawn looks really strong. They'll probably bring up their king and the other pawn. It's probably going to not end too well for white. And again, with the computer, you have to be very exact. But in a game with two human players, you know, you're a lot more likely to mess this up for the defending side. For either, you know, especially if you get under time pressure or something. So again, you don't have to be super precise like this, as long as you know the ideas. Okay, so we keep going a few moves here. So this is an interesting moment here, because I just want to notice that, you know, it looks like white is close to checkmating black. Not really. They also can't really keep checking either. So I mean, rook a7 is probably the best try, as the computer approved. But like back here, I just want to show a variation. You know, they can't keep checking. There's no perpetual, because black's king is going to get closer and closer. And then when they play up, you know, we'll just bring the king up here. And they can't go here because of the same thing we looked at. Where, you know, if they bring up, we can sacrifice, get both rooks. And these pawns are just way too advanced. The white king is too far out of the game. But okay, we can go back to the original position here. Game continues, play a check. And now we can actually just sacrifice here. You know, because this pawn is so advanced. What's going to happen is when we push this pawn to b2, you know, the rook can't get here and slide because of, you know, to block in front because the pawn would take it. And it can't access from behind either because the king would take. You know, so just because the coordination of this and the slow progress we've been making, queen captures f6 is actually played here because you just can't stop the pawn. And so we see how the side with the queen was better. And we keep going. They're going to take one of the pawns, but the other will promote. And now, you know, the technique is still a little tricky, but for the example of the queen versus two rooks, you know, we'll end it here because black is out of that endgame and they're theoretically better. In practical play, this is going to be fairly easy. What you do is use the queen, maybe help from your king. You basically gobble up these pawns, and then you play some kind of thing, either threaten checkmate or fork the rook. And eventually that's going to win, theoretical endgame for the side with the queen. But the main thing to look at here, go back to the very beginning, was in this, even though white had coordinated rooks, we saw how black was actually better. And so the reason why in this example was because their king was too exposed. So let's go to a second example where what if their king was a little bit safer. So I created another example here. And in this example, it looks very similar. Again, material is equal, because I don't like it when it's imbalanced and we can't really get to the heart of the matter. But here, both kings look relatively safe. And so, who would be better in this position? You know, white does have their rooks connected. They are seeing each other. So one might naturally think that white is better. However, there's one other problem now that they have. I would say black is better again, because there's one detail that you also have to consider. It's not just if the rooks are coordinated, and it's not only king safety, although we looked at that. So the other problem here is black has a lot of potential to put a lot of targets in the position. White has a lot of things that they have to defend, and it's going to be very difficult to do. The queen is a very good piece. It can attack a lot of things simultaneously, especially with the help of the rest of the army. So in this case, black is actually better, because if you were to invert it, you know, what are white's targets? White doesn't really have too much that they can really look at. Pretty much everything for black is well defended. So we'll start here. We'll flip the board. We'll play it from black because, again, I think black is actually better here because there's just too much potential for targets. You know, even c2 right now. Not to say they'll go after it, you know, but that's already a pawn that can be taken. Also, there's so many pieces that could potentially aim at the king side. Maybe weaken the position there. So we'll see how this goes. Bishop b7, improving their, you know, the position of their bishop. C4. Kicking away the centralized knight, looks fine. And I like this move, just slowly improving your position. Maybe this knight will go to the king's side, add more pressure. Maybe it'll centralize the d4. You know, very flexible move. And now we're aiming, of course, at h2. So, you know, white has to advance that pawn or do something so that way it can't be taken. And then c5, unleashing the power of these bishops here. And again, we're seeing a lot of the targets that I was alluding to. Just the fact that black has all this play, even though material is equal. You know, this is a really good thing for the queen. It's really a useful piece to help coordinate with the rest of its army. The two rooks, even though they're connected, you know, they're not as easy to make use of a bunch of targets everywhere. the queen can move across the board so easily. So we play a few more moves here. Now we're looking at another, weak pawn on the king side. So they have to try and block this way. Going back real quick, just want to comment. Of course, this isn't really a free pawn after the knight moved to d5. Because, of course, if, back here, if you just take this pawn, you're giving up on your back rank ideas. You still have the bishop here to defend, but long term that might actually be a problem because they also have a dark squared bishop. If they were to get that on the same diagonal, probably end up losing a piece on f8. So, you just have to be a little careful with back rank ideas. So they end up taking here. Now they play h6, creating an escape square so you don't have to worry about the back rank. And now they defend the pawn. Now that the back rank wasn't an issue, now you have to advance it. Queen b7, again, looking at a new target. First it was a2, now it's b3. Even before then, it was the king side, so they're just slowly making progress. Oftentimes, it's going to be better for the side with the queen. So they improve their knight by, maybe getting a little closer to the king. Maybe you can add to this pawn some kind of pressure in the future. So one thing I will show, just as a little variation again, is you might wonder why you can't take this pawn. And it's probably playable, but I think the problem is you get a bit too defensive, and black is definitely better here. Black should be attacking and pushing for a win. If you take this pawn, even though you're winning material, this a pawn is going to probably get pushed, and it's probably going to push the queen into defending, and we don't really want that. Maybe that line would go something like you take a6, have to come back to try and stop the pawn. They'll probably defend it, and then maybe like queen a7. But now we can see that our queen is stuck babysitting, trying to look at this pawn. And we really don't want it there. We want the queen a bit more active. We can see the engine here. This is almost equal already. So that was the problem with taking on b3. You basically put your best piece, the queen, on a defensive role, and we don't really want that. So, okay, so you play actively, use all of your pieces, trying to create targets. So now we're looking at this pawn again. They push. It's probably best that you sacrifice this pawn and then try and secure your a pawn. I guess the computer sees it's more valuable to use it this way. So they take. They support it just like we said. Okay, of course we had to save the knight, so we bring it back so the rook can't take it. Maybe this knight will centralize something like e5. Just slowly making progress here. White rooks are still connected. And we're just going to see that, really white's position is basically in Zugzwang. We see the king move here, and we're about to see the king come back again, which just kind of shows really how bad their position is. There weren't too many moves that you could really play. I mean, this bishop was tied down to the pawn. All these pawns aren't really going to go anywhere because there's a 3 versus 3 pawns, not even majority. It's pawn equal, 3 versus 3 on this flank. So these pawns weren't really going to go anywhere. You're really stuck between a bunch of rook moves, and it's going to be very difficult to stop this b pawn. So, a little progress here, trying to get the rook out of the way. Wins another pawn. Just simplifies. Yeah, and we can see, black is much better here. Just very difficult to stop the b2 pawn. Attacking the rook with tempo, I like that. Also supporting the pawn to go to b2. And then we advance the pawn. Yeah, and they can give a check, but again, we always have the escape square if we need it. And then that's probably just their desperation last attempt there. We end up pushing, they take. And here, white is, down by 7 points to black here. They haven't, we have an extra queen. Objectively, the endgame is at least over for that point. So again, we saw what, pretty much the best moves there. How, again, black was better. So in the first example, we saw that the side with the queen was better because a king was a bit too exposed. And in this case, both kings were safer, but the problem is now that the side with the queen had a lot of potential to create targets. Okay, so now let's go to the third example, which is actually the shortest one probably, where in this case the 2 rooks are going to be better. And so what's different? Well, the rooks are coordinated, just like we looked at. Both kings are relatively safe, so that looks the same. But what's different here in this position is that, the black queen, or whatever side has the queen, it doesn't have the potential to make so many targets. I mean, what are you really going to do to improve? I mean, maybe you could move here, aim for a quick checkmate, but that's not going to work. They're just going to stop the checkmate threat, and then you have nothing after that. So with no potential to attack targets, what else is there? The problem is your queen really doesn't want to sacrifice itself. And, what's it going to do? Take a pawn, take a rook. Literally everything is defended. The rooks are coordinated. The bishop defends the weak pawn of the pawn base. These pawns are defending. This pawn's defended by c2. This c2 pawn's defended by the bishop. Literally all the kingside pawns are defended by the pawn. White literally has everything defended here. And so they have literally no weaknesses. So we're probably going to see this be a pretty simple conversion here. Rook f to e1 just takes the open file. Queen moves. I like this move, aiming at the e8 square, so they're going to have to do something to stop this. Probably king to f8. Yep, king to f8. And also note that it's probably not a good idea if they play rook to e8. I'll just show us a variation. If they were to play this, you could sacrifice now. They take back. And although this is a smidge better for white, they've given up a lot of their advantage. Since, black does have an extra pawn for the exchange, 6 pawns to 5. And oftentimes an endgame is usually going to be drawn if it's a rook versus a minor piece, and the piece is near the center of the board, especially with the king. If the king and the piece are to the center, they kind of defend each other. You can't really force it to the edge, and it's a bit tricky, especially in practical play. Oftentimes it's a draw. So you don't want to give up a big part of your advantage. So back here, instead of rook to e8 check, what's stronger is just rook to d7. So that's played, rook to d7. And now it looks like black has an interesting move with a6, trying to remove the defender of the rook. And then if this bishop moves, they'd win the rook. But this just really shows just how powerful this position is. You don't even have to move the bishop, because the strongest idea, which is going to be played here, is always to double your rooks on the 7th. If you were black, it'd be doubling on the 2nd. And so doubling on those ranks is really important, because oftentimes you'll have the potential to give a lot of really annoying checks, gobble up these pawns, and perhaps threaten checkmate if the king is on that back rank. So these are just so powerful threats, you can't even think about taking this bishop. Best is just bishop d5, trying to defend this pawn. That's probably the best here. I'll just show really quickly what happens if you do take this. So if you do take that bishop, the problem isn't taking the bishop, because that's a bit drawish here. We don't want equal. So the key is you take this pawn with check. And the king will move, and you take again. We're gaining material along the way. And now, we can actually come back with the check, and then grab the bishop. And you can see that, the side with white is definitely better. They're even threatening checkmate right away in 1. So black has to do something like king to f8 just to stop the checkmate. They move. King takes here, again, threatening checkmate with the 2 rooks. So they have to go something like king to g8. And now you can just simplify by trading things off. You play this check, king has to move, it's all forced. And then you play this skewer, you'll pick up the queen. And this is going to be a very easy endgame, all because you try to grab the bishop on b5. So you can't allow that. This rook's just going to gobble up all these pawns. Queenside pawns for white are going to promote. It's going to be very easy from there. So going back to this, don't take the b5 bishop. And instead, the best try for defense, probably bishop d5. So after that, we're going to chase the queen away with a tempo here. They move. And now we can simplify. So unlike the position, it's a little bit different. We're going to be a bit more improved on this, because now we're attacking this pawn. And as this pawn advances, then this b6 pawn will be weak. Which also notice that's on the opposite color complex of this bishop. So this bishop won't really be a good piece to try and defend the pawn, because that's on the wrong color complex. So they can try and attack our pawns, not going to matter. We'll put it on the opposite color of the bishop, and we don't even have to worry about it. Play a6, we're going after the b6 pawn. You win that. We advance. Keep in mind, this is still defended by the rook. And we'll just kind of breeze through the moves fairly quickly here. See how the computer converts this. Looks pretty straightforward so far. This is also a nice idea. It ties down the bishop to defending the pawn. Maybe in some lines in the far future, you might even get a rook to sacrifice on b3, and then have the rest of the pawns convert. I also really like the h4 move. H4 here is just using 1 pawn, and it's freezing 2 of the opponent's pawns. So that just seems like a good, way to stop them, in 1 move. Good use of your resources. So they make all the small improvements they can first. They win the c5 pawn. And now it looks like they're ready to sacrifice. So now rook captures b3 is a very simple way. Not the only way, but a very simple way to just convert. And if they take, you just take back. And, we have an extra pawn majority on the king side. This queenside pawn is way too strong. You know, they can try and stop it, but, you know, they're not going to be able to stop it in time. We'll just keep pushing, escorting this pawn. And you're not even in time to stop it from promoting. Get it all the way, it's going to be a new queen. Okay, so in this case, we saw that this side with the 2 rooks ended up promoting to a new queen. So going to start here, you know, the reason this position was winning was because the side with the 2 rooks had the rooks coordinated, which is nice. Their king was also safe, and the opponent wasn't able to create targets in their camp. So because of that, you know, the side with the 2 rooks was better in this position. Going back to the very first position we looked at, you know, the problem here is black is a bit better because although the white rooks, you know, the side of the 2 rooks are connected, their enemy king is a bit exposed. And so because of that, the side with the queen, the side possible to give all these checks, is probably slightly better. Going to the second example here, you know, both kings are relatively safe, you know, so that's an improvement over the last one when we had the rooks connected. But the problem is we have the potential to create a bunch of targets. And so again, the side with the queen is better. So to kind of answer the question from the video, what is actually better? Is it the queen or is it the 2 rooks? You know, if material is equal, as in my examples were. And to that, it depends on those factors. So if the rooks are coordinated, you know, together, and the kings are safe, and you're not really able to have targets from the opponent, in this case like the queen attacking targets on white's camp, then generally that's how you just help determine if the rooks are better or if the queen is better. And this is just a useful thing to know. I don't think too many people address it in this exact way, but I think it'll help a lot of people win their chess games because both rooks are very tough to develop because oftentimes one of them gets stuck in the corner as one side castles. And a lot of endgames end in rook endgames. And of course, people don't want to give up their queen. So oftentimes rooks and queens, you know, could end up in the end of the game. I guess it'd be one queen unless one side promotes. But you get the idea. So it's a very common endgame type imbalance. And even in the middle game, I think it's a very useful thing to know. So I hope this video has helped everyone. And I will see you in the next chess video.